This was a struggle of Cuban patriots against a Cuban dictator.
On March 13th, 1962, the Joint Chiefs of Staff put this document in front of the Secretary of Defense for approval from the President. This is a memo prepared by the most senior leaders in the U.S. military, some of the most powerful men in the country. And they're asking for permission to execute a plan to lob mortar shells into their own military bases with some damage to installations, and then to make hijacking attempts against civilian air and surface craft. They're proposing to blow up a U.S. ship in the U.S. naval base Guantanamo Bay, and even to conduct a terror campaign on American soil, exploding a few plastic explosives in carefully chosen spots. We're looking at a plan to blow things up on American soil and then to blame it all on Cuba.
The Cuban people have not yet spoken their final piece.
This operation never happened, but it almost did, and that gets to a big question. Why would some of America's most powerful leaders charged with safeguarding our nation think that their duty would require them to lie to and terrorize the American people? In other words, why were they planning Operation Northwoods?
It is not the first time that communist tanks have rolled over gallant men and women. Let the record show that our restraint is not inexhaustible.
Before we dive into today's kind of insane video, I need to thank the sponsor, who I'm very grateful for. Thank you, BetterHelp, for sponsoring today's video. For 3 years, maybe, I've been in therapy, and I can say it has truly changed my life. It has changed my mind. It has changed how I see the world, and I've become a huge fan of therapy as a very, very important part of my happiness. BetterHelp is a place that makes therapy more accessible to people using technology. It is a platform where you sign up, you fill out a quick survey, and you get matched with a therapist. They have a huge network of tens of thousands of licensed therapists, and you can start therapy in as little as 48 hours. And you can choose how you do it. You can do it as a phone call or as a video chat or even as texting. The beauty about this model is that it doesn't bind you to the therapists who are available in your local geographical area. And it makes it so easy to schedule your therapy, to change your schedule, or even to change your therapist for free. Finding a therapist can be hard and emotional and difficult, and BetterHelp makes it easier for you. So if you are somebody who wants to try therapy out, BetterHelp is a fantastic way to try it and see if it could change your life as much as it has changed mine. Because they sponsored today's video, they're giving 10% off the first month for my audience who tries out BetterHelp. There's a link in my description. It's betterhelp.com/Johnny Harris. Thank you, BetterHelp, for sponsoring today's video. Let's dive back into Operation Northwoods. Operation Northwoods was a response to a problem the US government had. They called it the Cuba problem. Cuba became a problem for the CIA when they watched this young activist with an affinity for cigars lead a communist revolution on the island, throwing out the American-friendly dictator and nationalizing all the valuable land and industries that American businesses had been getting rich off for decades. This was the Cold War, and communism was now 90 miles away, threatening to spread to other countries in Latin America, countries that American businesses also wanted to continue controlling and exploiting. And any day, this new leader could align with the Soviet Union, giving the US's biggest geopolitical rival a military base within breathing distance of Florida. So this was what the Joint Chiefs called their Cuba problem. The US had a few solutions to their problem. First, they put an embargo on Cuba, blocking all US exports to the country, except for food and medicine. Second, they stopped buying Cuba's largest export, sugar. This actually ended up backfiring when the Soviet Union stepped in to buy Cuban sugar, kicking off an economic alliance between these two communist countries, exactly what the US didn't want. And third, the US started making plans. Lots of plans. Plans to somehow get rid of Castro, to turn Cuba back into the American business-friendly client state, through whatever means necessary. In one of these secret plans, called Operation Zapata, the CIA recruited 1,500 Cuban exiles who fled to Miami during the Cuban Revolution. It was this little CIA-funded army called Brigade 2506, and the goal was to have them invade Cuba and remove Castro from power. So the CIA trains them at this camp in the mountains of Guatemala, where they had just recently executed a coup and installed a US-friendly dictator. And right in the middle of the planning stages of this operation, JFK wins the presidency.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
And he inherits this scheme to invade Cuba using exiled Cubans. The CIA briefs him on it, this plan to fix the Cuba problem by forcibly unseating Castro using Cuban exiles. And after some debate, JFK approves the plan. So on the 17th of April, 1961, they launched their invasion. Brigade 2506 landed on Playa Girón with the plan to invade the island and spark a popular revolution against Castro.
The assault has begun on the dictatorship of Fidel Castro. Landings were effected by rebels at several...
But it was a complete failure. Castro had found out about the invasion ahead of time. A radio station on the beach had spotted the invading ships arriving and called for help. Several of the invading ships sank on the coral reef, and the invading forces were met with immediate resistance from Cuban armed forces who defeated them within 3 days. Most of them were captured. 9 US servicemen actually flew combat missions in support of this invasion, 4 of which were shot down and killed in the process, something the US government and the CIA would go on to deny for almost 30 years. But the point is that this invasion failed miserably, and JFK and his administration were to blame.
For too long we have fixed our eyes on traditional military needs, on armies prepared to cross borders, on missiles poised for flight. Now it should be clear that this is no longer enough.
JFK would later fire the CIA director, holding him responsible for the disastrous invasion plan that we know as the Bay of Pigs. But this didn't change anything. The US government was still obsessed with removing Castro from power. They just needed a new plan. So JFK initiates his own plan, called the Cuba Project, aka Operation Mongoose. Over the next year, the CIA employs hundreds of spies to collect intelligence on Cuba. They